The sound of a ventilator is rhythmic, hypnotizing, but the sound of a mother weeping is jagged. It cuts right through you. I looked down at my son, Evan. His arms weren't just broken, they were shattered, twisted at angles that defied nature. This wasn't an accident. This was geometry applied with malice. And the man responsible was standing in the hospital hallway eating a glazed donut, wiping sugar off his badge. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. I have seen war. I have seen what happens when a convoy hits an IED in the desert. And I have seen what men look like after 3 days of interrogation in a black site. I thought I had left that life behind me when I hung up my uniform and buried the name General Victor under layers of corporate paperwork and a quiet suburban life. I was wrong. The war had just followed me home. The doctor, a tired man named Dr. Evans, wouldn't look me in the eye. He kept adjusting his glasses, looking at the X-rays illuminated on the wall of the ICU. "Mr. Vance," the doctor said, his voice dropping to a whisper as if he was afraid someone outside would hear. "These are spiral fractures, both the radius and the ulna in the left arm, a compound fracture in the right humerus." I stared at the black and white image of my son's skeleton. It looked like a jigsaw puzzle that someone had smashed with a hammer. "Spiral fractures," I repeated, my voice steady, though my blood was boiling hot. "That comes from twisting torque." "Usually, yes," the doctor admitted. "It happens when a limb is held stationary and the body is rotated forcibly, or vice versa. Or when two men hold a boy down and twist his arms until they snap like dry kindling," I said. My wife Amelia was sitting in the chair next to the bed, holding Evan's swollen purple fingers. She hadn't stopped crying for 3 hours. She looked small, fragile. We were supposed to be the boring, wealthy family at the end of the cul-de-sac. We were supposed to be safe. "The police report says he fell," Amelia choked out, looking up at me with red, pleading eyes. "They said he was resisting arrest and fell down a flight of concrete stairs." I turned away from the X-rays and looked at Evan. He was 17. He played piano. He was looking at colleges. He had never been in a fight in his life. His face was beaten so badly his left eye was swollen shut, but it was the arms that told the true story. You don't get spiral fractures from falling. You get them from torture. "Stay with him," I told Amelia. "Victor, don't," she whispered. She knew. She was the only one who knew what I used to be. "Please, they are the police. I'm just going to get some coffee," I lied. I walked out of the ICU room. The hospital corridor was bright, smelling of antiseptic and floor wax. And there they were, 2 officers. One was older, looking bored, leaning against the wall. The other one, Officer Kyle, according to the nameplate on his chest, was young, maybe 25. He had a buzz cut, muscles that looked like they came from gym steroids rather than work, and a smug look on his face. He was holding a half-eaten glazed donut. I walked up to them. I didn't stomp. I didn't yell. I moved with the silence that 20 years of special operations teaches you. I was standing 3 feet from them before Officer Kyle even noticed me. "Help you, Pops?" Kyle asked, taking another bite. A flake of glaze fell onto his dark blue uniform. "I'm Evan's father," I said. The air shifted. The older cop straightened up, putting a hand near his belt, but Kyle just laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "Oh, right, the stairfall kid," Kyle said. He chewed slowly, looking me up and down. I was wearing a cardigan and slacks. To him, I looked like a soft, rich old man. "Look, Mr. Vance, is it? Your kid is in a lot of trouble. Assault on an officer, resisting arrest, possession of paraphernalia. We're doing you a favor by not cuffing him to that hospital bed right now. He has broken arms," I said. "Both of them. He shouldn't have fought back." Kyle shrugged. "Gravity is a—" I looked at Kyle's hands. His knuckles were bruised, freshly red. There was a small cut on his ring finger. "Spiral fractures," I said softly. "That takes a lot of force, officer. You have to really enjoy it to generate that kind of torque." Kay stopped chewing. His eyes narrowed. He stepped into my personal space, using his height to try and intimidate me. He was tall, but he had no center of gravity. I could see 3 ways to disable him before he could drop his donut, but I did nothing. Not yet. "Are you accusing me of something, old man?" Kyle asked. His voice dropped, losing the fake polite tone. "Because let me tell you how this works in this town. We say what happened, the judge believes what we say, and if you have a problem with that, maybe we find a reason to search your car, or your house, or your wife's purse." It was a threat, plain and simple. I looked at the older cop. Is this how the department operates? The older cop looked away. Kid fell. That's the report. Take it up with the chief. I looked back at Kyle. He was smirking again. He thought he had won. He thought he was a wolf talking to a sheep. He had no idea he was poking a sleeping dragon. My son plays piano, I said. It was a stupid thing to say, but it was the only thing anchoring me to sanity. Not anymore. Kyle laughed. Maybe he can learn to play with his nose. I felt a coldness wash over me. It was a familiar feeling. The ice. It's what happens when the human part of you shuts down and the soldier takes over. I memorized his face, the shape of his nose, the way his left ear stuck out slightly more than his right. I memorized his badge number, 4922. I want to file a formal complaint, I said. Kyle chuckled and leaned in close. So close I could smell the sugar and stale coffee on his breath. He whispered barely audible over the hospital PA system. You file a complaint and I guarantee you next time he doesn't just fall. Kyle hissed. Next time he stops breathing. Keep your mouth shut or next time it's his neck. He pulled back, winked at me, and tossed the rest of the donut into the trash can. Have a nice day, sir. They turned and walked toward the elevator, laughing about something the older cop whispered. I stood there for a long time. I looked at the trash can. I looked at the elevator doors closing. I didn't go back to the room immediately. I walked to the vending machine area where it was quiet. I took my phone out of my pocket. It was a sleek, modern smartphone, but I didn't use the regular dialer. I opened an encrypted app that looked like a calculator, typed in a 6-digit code, and waited for the secure line to connect. It rang once. Status? A voice on the other end asked. No hello, no names. Active, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, devoid of emotion, stripped of the fatherly grief. I need a full dossier on the local police department. Specifically, Officer Kyle, badge 4922. I want his financials. I want his schedule. I want to know where he sleeps. Target package initiated, the voice said. Are we engaging? I looked down the hall back toward the room where my son lay broken. His future stolen by a man who laughed about it. We aren't engaging, I said, watching the elevator numbers drop. We are dismantling. I hung up. I walked back into the room. Amelia looked up hopeful. Did you talk to them? She asked. Did they apologize? I walked over to the bed and smoothed the hair back from Evan's forehead. He flinched in his sleep. No, I said softly, but they will. Bringing Evan home was a logistical nightmare that no parent should ever have to solve. Every bump in the road made him groan in his sleep, the pain cutting through the heavy painkillers they had pumped into his system. When we finally pulled into the driveway of our estate, the silence of the neighborhood felt mocking. The manicured lawns, the sprinklers ticking in the distance, the safety we paid millions for. It was all an illusion. We had to carry him inside. My driver, a sturdy man named Thomas, who knew better than to ask questions, helped me lift Evan out of the back seat. Evan was dead weight, his casts clunking awkwardly against the car door frame. That sound, plaster hitting metal, made my stomach turn. We got him settled into his bed. Amelia sat by his side, adjusting the pillows, her hands shaking. I walked into the living room and poured myself a drink. I didn't drink often, but my hands were trembling with a rage I hadn't felt since Fallujah. I turned on the television, hoping for a distraction. Instead, I found a nightmare. The local news was on. The banner at the bottom read, "Teenager injured after attacking police." I froze. The reporter, a young woman standing in front of the police station, was reciting a script that was pure fiction. Police report that 17-year-old Evan Vance was apprehended late last night after officers found him acting suspiciously near the downtown district, the reporter said. When approached, the suspect became violent, assaulting Officer Kyle and resisting arrest. Police state that during the struggle, the suspect fell down a concrete stairwell, sustaining injuries. Drugs were found on the scene. I threw the glass. It shattered against the wall, leaving a dark stain on the wallpaper. Lies, I whispered. Evan didn't do drugs. Evan was an honor student. Evan was terrified of authority. They were painting him as a thug to cover their tracks. They were assassinating his character before he even woke up to defend himself. Victor, Amelia stood in the doorway, her face pale. Is that about us? They're controlling the narrative, Amelia, I said, my voice low. They know who we are, or at least they know we have money. They're getting ahead of the lawsuit. If the jury thinks Evan is a criminal, they won't care that the cops broke his arms. What do we do? She asked. I try to be the civilian, I said. walking past her toward the closet where I kept my safe. I tried to play by the rules, but they don't want a citizen, they want a war. I changed my clothes. I took off the cardigan and put on a dark tailored suit. I didn't put on a tie. I drove back into town, not to the hospital, but to the precinct. The police station was a fortress of brick and dirty glass. It smelled of stale coffee and floor cleaner. I walked up to the front desk. The sergeant on duty was a heavy-set man with a mustache that looked like a push broom. He didn't even look up from his paperwork. "Take a number," he grunted. "I don't need a number," I said. "I'm here to speak to Chief Grant regarding the assault on my son, Evan Vance." The sergeant stopped writing. He looked up slowly, his eyes scanning me. He recognized the name. "The Vance kid?" he scoffed. "Chief's busy, and unless you're here to pay his bail or turn in his accomplices, you're wasting my time." "My son is in the ICU," I said, leaning on the high counter. "He has spiral fractures. Your officers tortured him." "Watch your mouth," the sergeant snapped. "Officer Kyle is a decorated member of this force. Your son tripped, clumsy kid. Maybe you should have taught him how to walk instead of buying him fancy cars." He knew. They all knew. It was a closed loop. A gang with badges. I was about to reach across the desk and grab him by his collar, the old instincts flaring up when I heard a laugh. It was a distinct high-pitched cackle. I looked past the sergeant, through the glass partition into the bullpen where the officers had their desks. Officer Kyle was there. He was sitting on the edge of a desk, surrounded by 3 other cops, Blake, Dominic, and another one I didn't recognize. Kyle was holding a ruler. I watched frozen as Kyle bent the plastic ruler back. He was telling a story, using his hands to mimic a twisting motion. I told him, "Stop resisting." Kyle shouted loud enough for the room to hear, grinning. Then Kyle snapped the ruler. Crack. The other cops erupted in laughter. One of them, Dominic, high-fived Kyle. "Sounded just like dry wood, didn't it?" Dominic asked. "Louder," Kyle bragged. "Like a gunshot." "Huh?" They were reenacting it. They were celebrating the moment they broke my son's bones. It was their morning entertainment. I felt the blood drain from my face. The rage didn't explode, it imploded. It turned into a cold, hard singularity in the center of my chest. I stared at Kyle through the glass. He looked up, saw me, and for a second, he looked surprised. Then he just winked and made a shushing motion with his finger against his lips. I turned around and walked out. I didn't yell. I didn't demand to see the manager. I walked out into the cool night air. The sergeant yelled something after me, probably an insult, but I didn't hear it. I was already operational. I got into my car, but I didn't start the engine. I pulled out the burner phone again. I dialed the number. "Status," the voice answered. "The dossier isn't enough," I said. My voice was dead calm. "I need full surveillance. I want audio bugs in the precinct bullpen. I want a tracker on Unit 4 Alpha, and I want financial audits on every officer in that room, specifically Kyle, Blake, and Chief Grant. That requires authorization level 5 general." The voice said, "That is domestic espionage." "I am reinstating my commission effective immediately." I said, "This is not a police matter anymore. This is a hostile insurgency operating on American soil. They attacked my family. Authorization code Archangel 01. There was a pause on the line, a long silence. Then the sound of keys typing rapidly. "Code accepted. General assets are deploying. We will have eyes and ears inside the station within 2 hours." "Good," I said, watching the police station lights flicker through my windshield. "Burn them down. Start with their bank accounts, then we come for the rest." I started the car. The engine purred, a low growl that matched the vibration in my chest. They thought they had broken a boy. They had no idea they had just declared war on a god. The night after the visit to the precinct, I couldn't sleep. Neither could Amelia. Every creak of the house made her flinch, and every time Evan whimpered in his room, she squeezed my hand. It wasn't fear in me anymore, it was calculation. I had spent years dismantling enemy networks in silence using precision, patience, and the inevitability of mathematics. Now that system was aimed at a group of men who thought their uniforms made them untouchable. At 3 a.m., my laptop lit up with encrypted feeds. My unit hadn't failed me. 2 audio bugs were active in the precinct, one in the main bullpen, another in the locker room. Their patrol car cam feeds had been remotely cloned. I could see through their dash cams, hear through their radios, and track them like prey. For an hour, all I heard was mundane chatter, traffic stops, dispatch calls, routine nights. Then at 3:47 a.m., a voice I recognized, broke through the static. Kyle, he was bragging again. Man, I'm telling you, he said between laughter. You should have seen the rich kid cry when I twisted his arm. Blake almost puked from laughing so hard. Dude screamed like a rabbit stuck in a trap. You're messed up, Blake said, amused, but slightly nervous. Relax. These rich brats think they're untouchable. His dad's some finance guy or something. Chief says we already buried the report, so it's fine. Buried how? Someone else asked. Call chuckled. Tossed the body cam footage, edited the audio. Chief's got friends and records. Nothing sticks when the chief is chewing your alibi for breakfast. A scrape, the sound of metal hitting a locker. Blake again. What if the old man makes noise? Kyle's reply was casual, chilling. Then we paint the kid as a junkie, plant some dope, maybe a gun. You know the drill. Media eats it up. End of story. There was a pause, then more laughter. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the waveform on the screen. My mind didn't go to anger this time, it went to logistics. They were confident because they had structure. Corruption always does. I could already see the hierarchy. Chief Grant at the top, Kyle as the brute, Blake and Dominic as the enforcers. But every hierarchy collapses when you hit its infrastructure, money. I switched tabs to my internal system. My company's resources span continents, tech startups, logistics firms, private equity networks. I rerouted some dormant accounts to start the data sweep. Within minutes, my analyst pinged me. Found something strange. Officer Kyle, $72,000 annual salary, but owns 3 cars, a boat, and a second house in Maine. Cash purchase, mortgage non-existent. All bought last year. Money from where? I knew exactly from where. Blackmail, bribes, off-the-book payoffs. All the same underworld pattern. I traced the transactions. They funneled through a shell account tied to a construction company, one under Grant's wife's name. Amelia walked into the room quietly, her eyes red from crying. She wore one of my sweatshirts, sleeves dangling past her fingers. You haven't slept, she said softly. I didn't look up. Sleep is a luxury when men like him breathe free air. Victor, please. Her voice cracked. If you escalate this, you'll bring them all on us. I looked at her, then really looked. Fear, loyalty, and something else. Faith. She was terrified, but she knew me. She knew the way I worked wasn't impulsive. It was surgical. I won't start a war, Amelia, I said all in one. They started. She came closer, resting a hand on my shoulder. Promise me you'll stop before you become who you were. I didn't promise her anything. I couldn't. By 9 a.m., I had a complete map, phone records, patrol routes, partners, bank trails. They were an ecosystem of arrogance. I was going to starve them of oxygen. The next few days were quiet, eerily quiet. No calls from the station, no visitors, no press, but I knew why. They were scrambling. The first cracks had formed. Then Thursday morning, Kyle's partner, Blake, called him while he was driving. The conversation popped on my feed like a gunshot. Hey man, Blake's voice said, nervous. My paycheck bounced. The bank froze my account. I can't even buy gas. Kyle laughed. Probably some glitch. My card worked fine. Chill out, rookie. But it didn't last long. By afternoon, Kyle's voice changed. He had just tried his own card at a diner, denied 3 times. What the hell is happening, Blake? His tone was rising. Now I can't use my checking account either. Same here, Blake muttered. My mortgage payment bounced back. I smiled faintly. It had begun. By nightfall, I had eyes on them through a downtown traffic cam. They sat in their cruiser, both pale, both shouting into their phones like cornered animals. I could almost hear the panic thudding in their chests. The radio inside Kyle's car crackled. Unit 4 Alpha, return to the station. Chief wants to see you. Kyle slammed the steering wheel. Finally, maybe he knows what's going on. He didn't, because I already knew the truth about Chief Grant. Files stolen from his desktop revealed years of falsified reports, ghost officers on payroll, dead men drawing pensions, and the most damning piece, a warehouse receipt for evidence disposal that matched the date of Evan's beating. They had destroyed the tape, but they didn't know I had already copied his hard drive. That night, I sat in my office listening to the panic spread within the precinct. Kyle yelling, Grant demanding silence, officers whispering that the entire payroll was compromised. Some thought it was hackers, others fate. I stared at the screen where their voices flickered. No, I whispered. It's not fate. It's justice. Just as I was about to shut the laptop, a faint voice broke through one of the bugged audio feeds. It was Grant's. Make sure nothing traces back to me. And if that old man keeps poking around, handle him the same way you handle this kid. The air in the room froze. I paused the recording, replayed it again. His voice said, handled with an ease that only killers use. There was no remorse in it, only confidence. I saved the file and backed it up in 4 locations. Then I forwarded it to my legal advisor, Nathaniel Reed, a former JAG officer now working for my private foundation. Message sent. Bring the hammer. We're initiating phase 2. As I watched the file upload, Amelia came to stand behind me again. Her voice was soft, shaking. What now? I closed the laptop slowly. Now, I said, we let them feel what it's like when everything you built starts disappearing. I'll take their comfort first, their peace next, and their freedom last. Outside, dawn crept across the horizon. Pale lights slipping through the blackout curtains of our safe little mansion. Somewhere downtown, a line of blue uniforms was starting to realize the storm they had called was already above their heads, and I hadn't even touched them yet. The financial dismantling of Officer Kyle and his cohorts was a quiet masterpiece. Nathaniel, my lawyer, though calling him just a lawyer, is like calling a shark a fish, orchestrated it perfectly. We didn't hack anything illegally, we simply enforced every single overlooked clause in their contracts, triggered audits on every suspicious deposit, and flagged every inconsistency with the IRS. When you have enough money, the law isn't a wall, it's a weapon you can point. By Friday afternoon, Kyle was unraveling. I was listening through the bug in his patrol car as he screamed at a bank teller over the phone. What do you mean seized? Kyle shouted, his voice cracking. It's my damn money. Who authorized this? The teller on the other end was calm, bureaucratic. Sir, there's a federal flag on your assets pending an internal investigation regarding unexplained income. Until the inquiry is resolved, all accounts are frozen. Federal, Kyle whispered. The words sucked the air out of his lungs. He hung up. I watched the GPS of his patrol car sitting idling in a parking lot. He wasn't patrolling, he was paralyzed. Then came the second blow. Nathaniel had found the weak point in the precinct's armor, their insurance. Police departments carry massive liability policies. When an officer is flagged as high risk, the premiums skyrocket. We anonymously sent the insurance provider a dossier of Kyle's past complaints Chief Grant had buried, but failed to purge from the digital archives. Within hours, the precinct received a notice, policy cancellation warning. Chief Grant was furious. I listened to him raging in his office through the audio bug. Who is leaking this? Grant bellowed. How do they have these files? Half of these were shredded 3 years ago. I don't know, Chief. A timid voice replied. Probably the desk sergeant, but the insurance company says if we don't suspend Kyle and Blake pending review, they drop our coverage by Monday. Suspend my best men because some suits sent a letter. Grant slammed his fist on the desk. Get Kyle in here! I sat in my home office sipping black coffee, feeling the cold satisfaction of a plan working, but it wasn't enough. They were stressed, yes, but they were still free. Evan was still in a cast. I needed to see it. I needed to see the fear in their eyes, not just hear it through a speaker. I drove into town. I parked across the street from the precinct in my daily driver, a black sedan with tinted windows. I watched the front door. 20 minutes later, Kyle stormed out. He wasn't wearing his uniform. He was in civilian clothes, jeans, and a tight t-shirt. He looked smaller without the badge. He was pacing, talking on his phone, looking over his shoulder. He looked like a man who felt the walls closing in but couldn't see who was pushing them. He walked toward his personal car, a flashy sports car he had bought with that unexplained income. He pressed the unlock button on his key fob. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. Nothing. I watched as he tried the door handle. Locked. Then a tow truck pulled up. A big yellow flatbed. The driver hopped out with a clipboard. Hey, get away from my car, Kyle yelled, running over. Bank order, buddy. The driver said, bored. Repossession. Missed payments. I missed one payment because the bank froze my account, Kyle screamed, grabbing the driver's arm. The driver, a burly man who clearly dealt with angry people all day, just shook him off. Take it up with the lender, I just haul him. Kyle stood there helpless, as his pride and joy was winched up onto the truck. He looked around wildly, searching for someone to bully, someone to arrest, but he had no badge. He had no gun. He was just a guy watching his life get towed away. And then he saw me. I rolled down my window just an inch. Our eyes met across the street. He froze. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He knew. In that moment, he connected the dots. The old man at the hospital, the general, the frozen accounts, the car. He started walking toward me, then running. His face was twisted in a snarl. "You!" he screamed. "You dead son of a god!" I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just watched him come. When he was 10 feet away, he stopped. 2 men had stepped out from the coffee shop next to my car. They were wearing suits. They were large. They were expect ops guys I kept on retainer for personnel security. They didn't draw weapons. They just stood there, arms crossed, blocking his path. Kyle looked at them. He looked at me. He looked at the tow truck disappearing with his car. "You think this is funny?" Kyle spat, breathing hard. "You think money makes you safe? You have no idea who you're messing with. You think Grant is the top of the food chain. You're playing a game you can't win." I rolled the window down all the way. "I'm not playing, Kyle," I said softly. "I'm just cleaning up. You're dead," he hissed. "You and that kid of yours. You hear me? Dead." One of my security guards took a step forward. Kyle flinched. He backed away, pointed a shaking finger at me, and then turned and ran down the street. I watched him go. A bully without his power is a pathetic thing. But his words stuck with me. "You think Grant is the top of the food chain?" That wasn't just bluster. That was a slip. He implied there was someone above the chief, someone pulling the strings. I picked up my phone and called Nathaniel. "We need to dig deeper," I said. "Kyle just hinted that Grant has a handler who controls the chief." "I'll put the forensic accountants on it," Nathaniel said. "But Victor, be careful. If this goes higher than the police, we might be dealing with organized crime or politics." "It doesn't matter," I said, putting the car in gear. "If it goes to the governor, I'll take him down too." I drove home. The image of Kyle's fear fresh in my mind. It felt good, but it was a temporary victory. The real enemy was still in the shadows. When I got home, Amelia was waiting at the door. She looked terrified. "Victor," she said, her voice trembling. There was a package on the porch. My heart stopped. "Where is it?" "I didn't touch it. I called the bomb squad, but they transferred me to the precinct. They hung up on me." "Of course they did." I walked to the porch. There was a small cardboard box sitting on the welcome mat. No postage. Hand delivered. I knelt down. I didn't open it. I could smell it, the metallic tang of blood. I took out a pocket knife and carefully slit the tape. Inside was a single pristine white glove, and wrapped inside the glove was a photo. It was a picture of Evan taken through his hospital window recently, maybe an hour ago. Written on the back in red marker were 3 words: "We can touch him." The rage that filled me then wasn't the cold, calculating ice of the general. It was the hot, blinding fire of a father. They had escalated. They had threatened my son again. I stood up, clutching the photo. "Pack a bag," I told Amelia. "We're moving Evan tonight to the safe house." "Victor, do it," I roared, startling her. I softened my voice, struggling for control. "Please, just do it. We aren't safe here anymore." As she ran inside, I looked out at the dark street. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to be reckless. But they had made a fatal mistake. They thought fear would stop me. Fear doesn't stop a man like me. It only removes the last of his mercy. We moved Evan under the cover of darkness. My security team executed a ghost protocol transport. 3 decoy ambulances left the hospital at different intervals while Evan was moved in a nondescript laundry van. We took him to a private facility I owned 3 counties over, a place built for high-value executives recovering from surgery, or in my case, hiding from enemies. It was a fortress disguised as a clinic. Once Amelia and Evan were secure inside the perimeter, I went to work. The threat had shifted. Kyle's slip. "You think Grant is the top," gnawed at me. The photo on my porch meant they had surveillance on us, which meant they had resources beyond a small-town police budget. I sat in the secure command room of the facility. Banks of monitors glowed blue in the dark. My lead analyst, a woman named Sarah. "No, wait. Let's use Harper," a former NSA specialist, was typing furiously. "I traced the crier who dropped the package," Harper said, not looking away from her screen. "Traffic cams caught a delivery bike, played as fake, but facial rec got a hit. He's a low-level runner for a private security firm called Obsidian Shield." "Obsidian Shield," I muttered. "Mercenaries? Corporate security?" Harper corrected. "High-end. They do dirty work for Fortune 500s. Strike-breaking, executive protection, intimidation. Who hired them? That's the thing." Harper spun her chair around. "The payments to Obsidian Shield aren't coming from the police department. They're coming from a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Apex Holdings. Apex Holdings. The name sent a chill down my spine. It was familiar. Too familiar. Dig into Apex, I ordered. Find the beneficial owner. Already did, Harper said. Her face was grim. She hesitated. Victor, you're not going to like this. She put a document on the main screen. It was a deed of incorporation. The signature at the bottom was digital, but the encryption key belonged to one person. Julian Vance, my brother. The room seemed to tilt. Julian, my own flesh and blood. The brother I had bailed out of dead a dozen times. The brother who had always resented that I was the war hero and the business genius while he was just the playboy screw-up. It can't be, I whispered. It is, Harper said softly. Look at the timeline. Julian transferred $50,000 to Chief Grant's offshore account 3 days before Evan was attacked. The memo line on the transfer was just a date, the date of the attack. I sank into the chair. The betrayal hit harder than any bullet I'd ever taken. This wasn't just police brutality. This was a hit. Julian had paid the cops to break my son. Why? To break me. If I was distracted, grieving, or destroyed by a legal war, Julian could make a move on the family trust. He could take control of the empire. He broke his nephew's arms for a seat at the boardroom table. I closed my eyes. I saw Julian's face at Thanksgiving, smiling, patting Evan on the back. You're growing up fast, kid, Victor Harper asked. What are the orders? I opened my eyes. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, absolute clarity. Is Julian in town? He's at his penthouse in the city, Harper said, hosting a gala tonight. Of course he is, I said, celebrating. I stood up. Keep monitoring the cops. If they move an inch toward this facility, burn them. I'm going to pay my brother a visit. I didn't take a team. This was family business. I drove into the city. The gala was in full swing at the Vance Tower, the building that bore our name. I walked past the valet, ignoring the security guards who tried to stop me. I wasn't on the list, but I owned the building. I took the private elevator to the penthouse. The doors opened to the sound of jazz music and the clinking of champagne glasses. Julian was standing in the center of the room, wearing a tuxedo, holding court with a group of investors. He looked happy, triumphant. He saw me across the room. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned brighter and faker than before. Victor, he called out, spreading his arms. Everyone, my brother, the hermit, has finally graced us. The crowd parted. I walked toward him. I looked at his hands, soft manicured hands that had never held a weapon, never dug a foxhole, and never changed a diaper, hands that had signed the check to crush my son's bones. We need to talk, I said. Now Vic, don't be a bore. Have a drink. He tried to hand me a glass. I slapped it out of his hand. The crystal shattered on the marble floor. The room went silent. The jazz band stopped playing. Private, I said. Now Julian's smile vanished. He nodded to his guests. Excuse us. My brother is under a lot of stress. He led me into his study and closed the heavy oak doors. As soon as the latch clicked, he dropped the act. He walked to his desk and poured himself a whiskey. You look terrible, Victor, he said. How's the kid healing well? You paid them, I said. Julian froze. He didn't turn around. I don't know what you're talking about. I have the wire transfer. Julian, Apex Holdings, Cayman Islands. 50 grand to Chief Grant. Another 20 to Obsidian Shield for surveillance. Julian slowly turned around. He took a sip of his drink. He didn't look scared. He looked relieved, like he was tired of pretending. You always were the smart one, he sneered. I told them to use crypto, but Grant is an old-school idiot. Why? I asked. The word felt heavy in my throat. Why? Julian laughed. It was an ugly sound. Because you have everything. You have the money, the respect, the general legacy. And what do I have? An allowance. I'm 50 years old, Victor. And I'm living on an allowance you approve. So you heard Evan? I stepped forward. You heard a child? I didn't tell them to break his arms, Julian said, shrugging. I just told Grant to rough him up, plant some drugs, get him a record, make you look like a bad father so the board would vote you out of the trust for instability. The cops, they got carried away. Kyle is a psychopath. That's not on me. It is on you, I said. My voice was dropping lower into that dangerous register. You wound up the toy and set it loose. You don't get to blame the toy for what it destroys. So, what are you going to do? Julian challenged. Call the police. I own the chief. Sue me. It'll take years. By then, The scandal of Evan's drug arrest will have ruined you. He walked around the desk emboldened. Face it, big brother, you lost. Sign over the chairmanship to me, and I'll make the charges against Evan disappear. I'll call off the dogs. He thought he had leverage. He thought we were playing a business game. I looked at him, and for the first time I didn't see my brother, I saw a target. You think this is a negotiation? I said. It is. Julian smiled. No, I said. It's an interrogation. I pulled out my phone and played a recording. It was Julian's voice from 10 seconds ago. I just told Grant to rough him up, plant some drugs. Julian's face went white. You're recording everything always. I said, this goes to the board, it goes to the FBI, and it goes to the press. Julian lunged for the phone. He was slow, pathetic. I caught his wrist, the same wrist I used to hold when we crossed the street as kids, and I twisted. He screamed. He dropped to his knees. You broke my son, I whispered into his ear. Now I'm going to break your life. I shoved him away. He fell against the desk, clutching his wrist. Get out, Julian gasped. Obsidian is downstairs. I'll have them kill you. Obsidian works for the highest bidder, I said, opening the door. And I just doubled their fee. I walked out of the study, leaving my brother broken on the floor. The gala was silent as I walked through. I didn't care. I had the proof. I had the brother. But the war wasn't over. The cops, Kyle, Grant, the ones who actually enjoyed the violence, were still out there. And now that Julian was exposed, they would be desperate. A desperate enemy is the most dangerous kind. I got into the elevator. My phone buzzed. It was Harper. Victor, she said urgently. We have a problem. Chief Grant just emptied the armory. He's issued SWAT gear to Kyle and his crew. They aren't coming for you. They're heading to the hospital. My blood ran cold. They didn't know we had moved Evan. They were going to the empty hospital room to finish the job. Let them go, I said. Let them walk into the trap. The trap was simple but brutal. When you hunt wolves, you don't chase them into the woods. You leave a piece of meat out in the open and wait for them to come to you. The hospital room, room 304, was the meat. I drove toward the hospital, not to intervene, but to watch. Harper had tapped into the hospital's internal security feed. I pulled over in a dark lot 2 blocks away and watched the screen on my tablet. At 11:42 p.m., they arrived. No sirens, no lights, just 2 unmarked tactical vans pulling up to the rear loading dock. They're moving in, Harper's voice said in my ear. 5 hostiles. Kala's Point. Grant is in the command van outside. I watched on the screen as the team moved through the service corridors. They were wearing black tactical gear, balaclavas, and carrying assault rifles. This wasn't a police raid, it was an execution squad. They moved with a sloppiness that offended me, swinging their muzzles too wide, bunching up at corners. Bullies playing soldier. They reached room 304. Kyle kicked the door open. They rushed in, weapons raised, shouting, "Clear!" one shouted. "Bed is empty," Kyle yelled. He ripped the sheets off the bed. "He's gone. The little rat is gone." I pressed a button on my tablet. Inside room 304, the television on the wall flickered to life. The static cleared, and my face appeared on the screen. It was a pre-recorded message. "Gentlemen," the video Victor said calmly, "if you are seeing this, you have just committed armed burglary and conspiracy to commit murder. Smile." Kyle spun around and shot the TV. The screen exploded in a shower of sparks. "Pull out," Kyle screamed into his radio. "It's a setup. Abort." But it was too late. I had already forwarded the live feed to the FBI field office in the state capitol. The bureau doesn't like it when local cops turn into hit squads. As they scrambled back to the vans, I started my car. I wasn't going to let Grant slip away. He was sitting in the command van, thinking he was safe behind the lines. I pulled up behind the van, blocking it in. I stepped out. I wasn't armed with a gun. I held a thick manila folder. Grant saw me in his side mirror. He opened the door and stepped out, his hand resting on his holster. He was a big man, sweaty with eyes that darted around like a trapped animal. "You're making a mistake, Vance," Grant growled. "You're interfering with a police operation." "Operation?" I asked, walking closer. "Is that what you call murdering a teenager in a hospital bed?" "We had intel he was armed." Grant lied. The lie was so lazy it was insulting. "I know about Julian," I said. That stopped him. His hand froze on his gun. "I know about the 50 grand, I continued. "I know about Apex Holdings. And I know Julian just confessed on tape. He's going to give you up to save himself, Grant. That's what rich cowards do. They sell out the help." Grant's face turned a mottled purple. I am the chief of police. You're a hired thug, I said, and your contract just expired. I tossed the folder at his feet. It landed with a heavy slap on the asphalt. What's this? He asked. Your surrender? I said. It's a list of every bribe you've taken in 10 years. Every evidence locker theft, every false arrest. You have two choices. One, you drive away and I release this to the press, the feds, and the cartel guys you stole drug money from last year. Two, you give me Kyle. Grant looked at the folder. He looked at me. He looked at the back door of the hospital where his men were running out, panicked. Kyle is my nephew, Grant said quietly. The revelation hit me. That's why Kyle was untouchable. That's why he could break bones and laugh. Neatism protecting sadism, then you failed him twice, I said. Once by raising him to be a monster, and now by letting him take the fall. Grant drew his gun. It was a clumsy draw. He was fast, but he telegraphed it. He dipped his shoulder before his hand moved. I didn't think, I reacted. I stepped inside his guard, grabbed his wrist with my left hand, and drove my right elbow into his forearm. Snap! The sound was loud in the quiet parking lot. Grant screamed and dropped the gun. I kicked his legs out from under him, and he hit the pavement hard. I picked up his gun, I ejected the magazine, and tossed the weapon into the bushes. That's one, I whispered. Grant was writhing on the ground, clutching his broken arm. You assaulted an officer. I defended myself against a corrupt civilian. I corrected. You lost your badge the minute you took my brother's money. Just then, the van doors burst open. Kyle and his crew piled in, not seeing me in the shadows behind the vehicle. Go, go, go! Kyle screamed at the driver. The driver floored it. The van screeched away, leaving Grant on the ground. They left their chief. They left their uncle. I looked down at Grant. He was crying now, not from pain, but from the realization that he was alone. Where are they going? I asked. Grant looked up, his eyes filled with hate. They know where you live. If the kid isn't here, they figure he's at the house. My heart stopped. The house? The house is empty. I said, Amelia and Evan are safe. Are they? Grant wheezed, a bloody smile forming. We tracked your wife's phone, not the one she uses, the burner she bought yesterday. She's at the lake house, isn't she? I felt the blood drain from my face. Amelia had bought a burner phone to be safe, but if she turned it on, if she made one mistake, you tracked her. I grabbed Grant by his collar. Kay is already halfway there. Grant laughed, spitting blood, and he's not looking to arrest anyone anymore. He's looking to settle the score. I dropped him. I ran to my car. The lake house, it was our secondary retreat, 30 miles out of town. It wasn't the secure facility I had told Grant about. It was just a house, a wooden house in the woods. No panic room, no reinforced doors. I dialed Amelia. Pick up, pick up, pick up, I chanted. She answered on the second ring. Victor, is it over? Get out, I shouted. Get Evan and run into the woods now. What? What? They're coming. Kyle is coming. Leave everything. Run. I heard a sound in the background of the call. The sound of glass shattering. Then a scream. Amelia. The line went dead. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat and floored the accelerator. The engine roared. 30 miles. I had to cover 30 meters in 20 minutes. I wasn't a general anymore. I wasn't a businessman. I was a father driving into hell. I drove like a madman. The speedometer needle buried itself past 120 miles per hour. The world outside blurring into streaks of black and gray. Every second that ticked by was a second Kyle and his goons were alone with my family. My mind replayed the sound of the glass shattering over and over. The lake house was isolated, a beautiful trap. It sat at the end of a long single-lane dirt road surrounded by dense pine forest. If they blocked the road, there was no way out for Amelia. I called Harper. Status on the lake house. I can't access the cameras. Victor, she said, her voice tight with panic. They cut the power. The line is dead, but I have a satellite thermal view. There are 3 heat signatures inside the house for outside moving in. 3 inside? I asked, swerving around a logging truck. Amelia, Evan, who is the third? I don't know. It's small. Maybe a dog. We didn't have a dog. Call the state police, I ordered. Tell them officer down at the lake. Get a chopper in the air. ETA for police is 20 minutes. Victor, you're on your own. I hung up. I was 5 minutes out. I killed my headlights as I turned onto the dirt road. I couldn't let them see me coming. I navigated by the moonlight and memory, the tires crunching softly over the gravel. When I saw the house, my heart hammered against my ribs. The front door was wide open. A police tactical van was parked on the lawn, its headlights illuminating the front porch. I stopped the car 100 yards back and got out. I opened the trunk. I didn't have my military gear that was in storage, but I had a tire iron. It wasn't much, but in the hands of a desperate man, it was enough. I moved through the trees, circling to the back of the house. I could hear shouting inside. "Where is he? Where is the money?" It was Kyle's voice. He wasn't just there for revenge, he was looking for a payoff. He knew his career was over, so he was trying to rob us before he fled. I reached the back deck. The sliding glass door was smashed. That was the sound I had heard. I stepped over the shards, moving silently into the kitchen. The living room was chaos. Furniture was overturned. Kyle was standing in the center of the room, holding a gun to Amelia's head. She was on her knees, sobbing. But Evan wasn't there. "Tell me where the safe is," Kyle screamed, pressing the barrel into her temple. "I know your husband keeps cash here." "I don't know," Amelia cried. "Please just let us go." Two other cops, Blake and Dominic, were tearing apart the bookshelves, looking for a wall safe. "Boss, we got nothing," Blake yelled. "We need to bail. The old man is probably on his way. He's not coming." Kyle sneered. "I left Grant to handle him. We have time." I gripped the tire iron. I calculated the distance. 20 feet, 3 targets, 1 hostage. The odds were terrible. If I charged, he would shoot Amelia. I needed a distraction. Then I saw the third heat signature hiding behind the overturned sofa. Clutching a heavy brass candlestick was Evan, my son. The boy with the broken arms. His casts were still on, thick white plaster. He looked terrified, pale as a ghost, but he wasn't cowering. He was watching Kyle. He was waiting. Kyle turned his back to the sofa to shout at Dominic. "Check the bedroom again." In that split second, Evan moved. He didn't have the strength to punch, but he had leverage. He stood up and swung his cast like a club. The plaster-encased arm connected with the back of Kyle's knee with a sickening thud. Kyle roared and buckled, his leg giving out. The gun fired wildly into the ceiling. "Run, Mom!" Evan screamed. It was the opening I needed. I launched myself from the kitchen shadows. No, I tackled Blake first. He turned, eyes wide, but the tire iron caught him in the shoulder. He went down hard, his collarbone snapping. I didn't stop. I spun and threw the iron at Dominic. It hit him square in the chest, knocking the wind out of him and sending him crashing into the fireplace. Kyle was scrambling to get up, trying to aim the gun at Evan. "You little," Kyle shouted. He raised the weapon. I was too far away. Bang! The shot deafened me. I froze. Amelia screamed, but Evan didn't fall. Kyle didn't fall. Standing in the doorway of the hallway was Julian, my brother. He was holding a small silver pistol. Smoke curled from the barrel. He had shot Kyle in the shoulder. Kyle dropped his gun, clutching the wound, blood seeping through his tactical vest. Julian looked wrecked, his tuxedo torn, his face bruised from where I had twisted his wrist earlier. He looked at me, then at Evan. "I didn't want this," Julian whispered, his hand shaking. "I wanted the money. I didn't want this." For a second, nobody moved. The villain had saved the hero, but why? "You followed me?" I asked, stepping toward him. "I came to warn you," Julian said, his voice cracking. "Grant called me. He said Kyle was going rogue. He said Kyle was going to kill them." Kyle, groaning on the floor, looked up at Julian. "You sold us out, Julian. You promised us protection." "Shut up," Julian yelled. "You touched the family. You don't touch the family." It was twisted logic. Julian was willing to destroy me financially, but physical murder was a line he couldn't cross. It was the only shred of humanity left in him. I walked over to Kyle. He tried to crawl away, dragging his bleeding leg. I kicked him onto his back. I stood over him. The general was back. "You broke my son's arms," I said quietly. "It was just a job," Kyle sobbed. "I was following orders." "No," I said. "You enjoyed it. I heard the tapes." "You laughed." I looked at Evan. He was leaning against the sofa, breathing hard. His casts cracked from the impact. He looked at me. He didn't look like a victim anymore. He looked like a survivor. "Dad," Evan said softly, "don't." He knew what I was thinking. He knew I wanted to end Kyle right there. "He's not worth it," Evan said. I looked at Julian. "Call the police. The real ones." Julian nodded, pulling out his phone. But the night wasn't done. Dominic, the one I had thrown into the fireplace, was stirring. He grabbed a heavy iron poker from the hearth. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Julian. traitor. Dominic screamed. He lunged. Julian, look out, I shouted. Julian turned, but he was too slow. Dominic swung the poker. It struck Julian in the side of the head. Julian collapsed instantly, the silver pistol skittering across the floor. Dominic grabbed the gun. He pointed it at me. Nobody moves. Dominic screamed, his eyes wild. Nobody moves or I kill the billionaire. We were back to square one. Standoff. Put the gun down, son, I said, raising my hands. It's over. It's not over until we say it's over, Dominic yelled. Kyle, can you walk? Yeah. Kyle grunted, forcing himself up. Let's finish them and burn the house. No witnesses. They were going to do it. They were going to kill us all. I looked at Amelia. She was inching toward the kitchen counter where a block of knives sat. She caught my eye. A silent message passed between us. Ready now? I shouted. Amelia threw a heavy vase at Dominic. It missed, but it made him flinch. I dove for the gun. The struggle for the gun was ugly. It wasn't like the movies where the hero disarms the villain with a smooth karate chop. It was a scramble of limbs, sweat, and desperation on a hardwood floor covered in glass. I slammed into Dominic's waist, driving him back into the wall. The gun went off. Bang, blowing a hole in the floorboards inches from my ear. My hearing went out in a high-pitched whine. I grabbed his wrist, slamming it against the wall again and again. Drop it, I wailed. Dominic was young and strong, fueled by adrenaline. He kneed me in the ribs, knocking the wind out of me. I gasped, my grip loosening. He raised the gun, aiming for my chest. Then a shadow moved. Amelia. She didn't have a knife. She had a heavy cast-iron skillet from the kitchen rack. She swung it with both hands, a primal scream tearing from her throat. Clang! The skillet connected with the side of Dominic's head. His eyes rolled back and he crumpled like a puppet with its strings cut. The gun clattered to the floor. I kicked the weapon under the sofa and scrambled up, gasping for air. Behind you! Evan screamed. I spun around. Kyle was up. He was injured, bleeding from the shoulder where Julian had shot him and limping from Evan's blow to the knee. But he was holding a knife, a tactical combat blade he had pulled from his boot. He lunged at me. I sidestepped, but not fast enough. The blade sliced across my forearm, cutting through my shirt and skin. Hot blood sprayed. I'm going to carve you up, old man, Kyle hissed, slashing again. I backed away, circling the living room. I was bleeding. I was tired. I was 50 years old, fighting a man half my age who had nothing to lose. You like breaking bones? I panted. Let's see how you like it. I didn't run. I stopped. I adopted a stance I hadn't used in 20 years. Krav Maga, efficient, brutal. Kyle lunged again, a clumsy overhand stab. I caught his wrist mid-air. I didn't just block it. I trapped it. I stepped in close, chest to chest, and used his own momentum against him. I twisted his arm behind his back, forcing the joint beyond its natural limit. This is for the left arm, I whispered. I jerked upwards. Crack! Kyle screamed. A high, wet sound, his shoulder dislocated with a pop that echoed in the room. He dropped the knife, but I wasn't done. The title of this story wasn't a metaphor. I swept his legs, slamming him face first onto the floor. I pinned him with my knee on his spine. He was thrashing, begging. Stop, please, I yelled. Evan didn't get to yield, I said, cold as ice. I grabbed his right arm, the one he used to hold the donut, the one he used to snap the ruler, and this, I said, is for the right arm. I pulled back. No, 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 snap. I didn't break the bone. I shattered the elbow. It was necessary. A man with broken arms can't hold a gun. A man with broken arms can't hurt my family. I stood up, breathing heavily. Kyle lay on the floor, curled in a fetal position, sobbing into the rug. It's over, I said. The room was silent except for Kyle's whimpering and a crackle of the fireplace. Amelia rushed to me, tearing a strip from her blouse to wrap my bleeding arm. Victor, you're hurt. I'm fine, I said, looking at Evan. Are you okay? Evan nodded. He looked at Kyle with a mix of pity and disgust. Is Uncle Julian dead? I walked over to where Julian lay. He was unconscious, bleeding from a head wound, but breathing. His chest rose and fell in shallow rhythms. He's alive, I said. Barely outside, the sound of rotors cut through the night air. Flop, flop, flop. Blue and red lights flashed through the windows, but they were brighter this time, more intense. State police, I said, or feds. I walked to the front door and opened it. The front lawn looked like a scene from a movie. A helicopter was landing in the clearing for black SUVs screeched to a halt behind the local police van. Men in FBI windbreakers swarmed the property. Federal agents, drop any weapons. I raise my hands. House is secure. Suspects are neutralized. A woman stepped out of the lead SUV. She wasn't wearing tactical gear. She was wearing a trench coat. It was Agent Harper, my analyst. She wasn't just my employee, she was my liaison to the bureau. She walked up the steps, looked at me, looked at the blood on my arm. "You look like hell, Victor," she said. "You're late," I replied. "Traffic," she quipped dryly. She signaled her team. "Get medics in there, secure the suspects." As the EMTs rushed past me, Harper lowered her voice. "We found Grant. He was crawling down the highway. He gave up everything. The bribes, the hit, Julian, everything. It's a clean sweep, Victor." I looked back inside the house. They were loading Kyle onto a stretcher. He was strapped down, screaming about his arms. "It's not clean," I said, watching them carry my brother out next. Family never is. They took everyone away, but as I looked at the dark forest, I knew the hardest part was just beginning. Healing isn't about winning a fight. It's about living with the scars. The aftermath of violence is bureaucracy. For the next 3 weeks, my life wasn't about battles or strategy. It was about depositions, affidavit, and witness statements. The story of the billionaire general who took down a corrupt police force went viral. Of course, the media dubbed me the vigilante of Vance Tower. I hated it. I wasn't a vigilante, I was a father who had run out of options. Evan's recovery was slow. The doctors had to reset his left arm because the initial casting had been rushed. I sat with him every day in physical therapy, watching him grit his teeth as he tried to flex his fingers. "It hurts," he said one afternoon, sweat beading on his forehead. "I know," I said. "Pain is just the body's way of telling you it's still alive." He looked at me. "Is that what you told yourself in the war?" "Something like that," I lied. The legal hammer came down hard on the conspirators. Chief Grant, eager to avoid dying in a federal prison, sang like a bird. He gave up names of judges, city council members, and even a state senator who had been on his payroll. The corruption went deeper than I thought. It was a rot that had infected the entire county. But the biggest trial was the one I dreaded most. The United States versus Julian Vance. I had to testify against my own brother. The day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, sketch artists, curious onlookers. I walked in wearing a suit that cost more than the judge's car, but I felt like I was wearing a straitjacket. Julian sat at the defense table. He looked small. The arrogance was gone. His head was shaved. Prison regulation. And he wore an orange jumpsuit. He refused to look at me. I took the stand. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Da Reynolds, walked me through the timeline, the wire transfers, the recording in the penthouse, the shooting at the lake house. "Mr. Vance," Reynolds asked, pacing in front of the jury box, "did your brother ever express remorse for ordering the assault on your son?" I looked at Julian. He was staring at his hands. Hands that were shaking. "He said he didn't want Evan's arms broken," I said quietly. "He said the police got carried away." "And did you believe him?" "I believe he wanted to break my spirit. I said he used my son as a tool. Whether he wanted bones broken or just bruises, the intent was destruction." The jury scribbled notes. It was damning. Then it was the defense's turn. Julian's lawyer stood up. He was a slick, high-priced attorney I recognized from the country club circuit. "Mr. Vance," the lawyer began, "isn't it true that on the night of the incident at the lake house, Julian Vance shot Officer Kyle, effectively saving your life?" "He shot Kyle," I admitted, "and he warned you about the attack." "Yes, so, in the end, he chose family over the conspiracy." I paused. The courtroom held its breath. "He chose self-preservation," I said coldly. "He knew if I died, the investigation wouldn't stop. He was trying to buy leniency." Julian looked up then. His eyes were wet. He mouthed one word to me. "Sorry." I looked away. Sorry didn't fix spiral fractures. Sorry didn't erase the nightmare of seeing a gun to my wife's head. The trial lasted 3 days. The verdict took 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was set for a month later. As I walked out of the courthouse, a swarm of microphones was shoved in my face. "General Vance, how do you feel seeing your brother convicted? Will you visit him in prison? What about the police officers?" I pushed through them, my security team clearing a path. I got into my car where Amelia was waiting. She took my hand. "It's done," she said. Almost, I said. There was one loose end. A twist I hadn't seen coming until Harper dropped a file on my desk that morning. We drove, not home, but to a quiet, upscale cafe in the city center. I told Amelia to wait in the car. I walked inside. Sitting at a corner table, sipping an espresso, was Nathaniel, my lawyer, the man who had helped me dismantle Kyle's finances. The man I trusted with my life. He smiled when he saw me. Victor, to what do I owe the pleasure? Celebrating the verdict. I sat down. I didn't smile. I placed a single piece of paper on the table. It was a bank record. Not from Julian, from Nathaniel. What is this? Nathaniel asked, his smile faltering. It's a transfer, I said. From Apex Holdings, Julian's shell company, $10,000 a month for the last 5 years. Nathaniel went pale. He reached for the paper, but I put my hand over it. You were the mole, I said softly. You were feeding Julian information about my business deals for years. That's how he knew when to strike. That's how he knew about the trust fund clauses. Victor, wait, Nathaniel stammered. It was consulting fees, legitimate work consulting on how to destroy your client. I asked. You played both sides, Nathaniel. You helped me destroy the cops because they were liabilities. You wanted them gone so they wouldn't implicate you. Nathaniel's face hardened. The friendly lawyer mask dropped. Julian promised me a seat on the board. He hissed. You treat everyone like soldiers, Victor. Tools to be used. I wanted a piece of the empire, so you let them break my son's arms. I said, I didn't know about the violence. Nathaniel protested. Too loud. People in the cafe turned to look. I just gave Julian the financial leverage. The cops were his idea. You're fired? I said, fired? Nathaniel laughed nervously. Victor, I know where all the bodies are buried. You can't just fire me. I'll ruin you with regulatory leaks. I leaned in close. Nathaniel, look out the window. He looked. 2 FBI agents were standing by his car. I gave Harper the file an hour ago. I said, attorney-client privilege doesn't cover participation in a RICO conspiracy. You're not just fired. You're indicted. Nathaniel stood up, knocking his chair over. He looked at the door, then back at me with pure hatred. You really are a monster, he spat. No, I said, taking a sip of his abandoned water. I'm a father, and you threatened my cub. I watched as the agents came in and cuffed him. Another betrayer gone, another weed pulled from the garden. I walked back to the car. Amelia looked at me, questioning. Is he? He's gone, I said. We drove home in silence. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the city. It felt like the end of a very long war. But as any soldier knows, the silence after the gun stop is the loudest part. When we got home, Evan was sitting on the porch. He had a guitar in his lap. He couldn't play it yet. His casts were still on, but he was plucking the strings with a plastic pick held between his thumb and forefinger. A clumsy, simple melody. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I sat down next to him on the steps. Does it hurt? I asked. A little, he said, but the doctor said the bones will grow back stronger. Calcification or something. Calcification, I repeated. Harder than before. Yeah. Evan looked at me. Dad, yeah. Are we safe now? I looked at the gate, at the new security cameras, at the peaceful street. We're safe, I said. I promise. And for the first time in months, I actually believed it. 6 months later, the winter had turned to spring, and the ice that had gripped my life began to thaw. The legal proceedings were finally wrapping up. The advanced conspiracy had become a case study in law schools, a perfect storm of corporate greed, police corruption, and family betrayal. I visited the state penitentiary on a Tuesday. It was a gray, rainy day. I wasn't there to see Julian. I was there to see Kyle. I needed closure, not legal closure. That was done. Emotional closure. I needed to look the monster in the eye one last time and see if the fire was gone. I sat in the visitation booth. The glass was thick, scarred with scratches. Kay was brought in. He looked different. He had lost 30 pounds. His buzz cut had grown out into a patchy, unkempt mess. His right arm, the one I had shattered, hung at an awkward angle. The prison doctors had said it, but it would never be straight again. He carried it stiffly like a dead branch. He sat down. He didn't pick up the phone. He just stared at me. I picked up the receiver. Pick it up, I said. My voice was calm. Kyle hesitated, then used his good hand to lift the phone to his ear. What do you want? He rasped. Come to gloat. No, I said. I came to tell you something, that you won. I know. Everyone knows. The general who beat the system, he spat the words. You think you're a hero. You ruined my life over a punk kid. You ruined your own life. I corrected him. And Evan isn't a punk. He's playing piano again. Kyle flinched. The mention of the piano seemed to hit him. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was just jealousy that his victim had healed while he was broken forever. I have a lot of time to think in here, KL said, leaning closer to the glass. And I realized something. You didn't beat us because you were righteous. You beat us because you were richer. If you were a poor man, if you were just some guy from the projects, your son would be dead and I'd still be eating donuts. I stared at him. He was right. And that was the horror of it. You're right. I said justice is expensive. That's why I'm making it free. Kyle frowned. What? I started a foundation. I said the Evan Vance Legal Defense Fund. We're funding investigations into police misconduct in every precinct in the state. We're hiring the best lawyers money can buy to represent the people you used to bully. The poor guys you talked about. Kyle's eyes widened. I'm using my fortune to make sure men like you never sleep soundly again. I continued. Every time a cop breaks a rule, every time they plant evidence, every time they use excessive force, my lawyers will be there. You didn't just lose, Kyle. You started a revolution. Kyle slammed the phone down. He stood up, shouting something I couldn't hear through the glass. The guards grabbed him. As they dragged him away, he looked small, powerless, just a man in a cage. I hung up the phone. I walked out of the prison and took a deep breath of the rainy air. It smelled clean. I drove to the hospital, not for an emergency, but for a checkup. Evan was having his final cast removed from his left arm. When I walked into the exam room, Dr. Evans was cutting through the plaster with a vibrating saw. Evan was smiling. Amelia was taking a video on her phone. Almost there, the doctor said. The cast cracked open. Evan pulled his arm free. It was pale, thin, and scarred, but it was straight. He flexed his wrist. He rotated his forearm. How does it feel? Amelia asked. Light, Evan said. It feels light. He looked at me. Dad, look. He made a fist. It was weak, but it was a fist. Strong, I said, choking back a lump in my throat. Iron. We left the hospital and went to a diner for lunch. Burgers and shakes. It was a normal family moment, the kind we used to take for granted. So, Evan said, dipping a fry in ketchup. Uncle Julian wrote me a letter. The table went quiet. He did? I asked. The prison mail screeners must have let it through. Yeah, he sent it to the house. Evan pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. I took it. The handwriting was shaky. Evan, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that the greed ate me alive. I looked at you, and I didn't see my nephew. I saw an obstacle. I became a monster. I'm glad your father stopped me. I'm glad I'm in here. Maybe I can find my soul again. Be good. Be better than us. Uncle Jay, I folded the letter. What do you want to do with this? I asked. Evan took it back. He thought for a moment. I'm going to keep it, he said. To remind me. Remind you of what? Amelia asked gently. That family isn't just blood, Evan said, looking at me. It's who shows up when the bleeding starts. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. It meant I said that night I sat in my office. The house was quiet. I opened my laptop. The war room files, the surveillance logs, the entire dossiers on Grant and Kyle were still sitting on my desktop. I clicked on the folder. Delete? The screen asked. My cursor hovered over the button for a moment. Part of me wanted to hold on to it, keep it as insurance, maybe even as a trophy. The soldier in me had never been comfortable throwing away intelligence. But the war was finished now, and clinging to old weapons only invites a new fight. I pressed delete. The files disappeared. The screen went blank. I shut the laptop and headed upstairs to the bedroom. Amelia was already asleep. I lay down beside her, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. For the first time in 6 months, I didn't pull up the perimeter cameras on my phone. I didn't strain to hear footsteps in the hallway. I simply closed my eyes and let sleep take me. A full year had gone by since that night at the lake house. The seasons had turned over completely, washing away the blood and the fear, and replacing them with something new. We stood at the grand opening of the Vance Community Center, right in the heart of the neighborhood where Officer Kyle and his crew once terrorized residents. The building itself was stunning, glass walls, open airy spaces, and most importantly, a legal aid clinic on the ground floor offering free representation to anyone who couldn't afford a lawyer. I stood at the podium, adjusting the microphone. The crowd stretched out before me, far more than journalists and politicians. There were mothers who had lost their sons to a broken system, fathers who had been silenced for too long. Every one of them was watching me. They call me a vigilante, I began, my voice carrying through the hall. They say I took the law into my own hands. But the truth is, the law had already been abandoned. I simply picked it back up. Applause broke out across the room. This center isn't a monument to what happened, I continued. It's a promise that no father should ever have to become a warrior just to keep his child safe. A promise that justice shouldn't come with a price tag. I glanced toward the front row, where Amelia sat glowing in a blue dress, and beside her, Evan. He no longer looked like the shattered boy from before. At 18, he stood tall, holding a violin case in his hands. He'd switched instruments during his recovery. Piano had demanded too much wrist movement early on, so he'd picked up the violin instead to rebuild his coordination, and somewhere along the way, he'd fallen completely in love with it. And now, I said, stepping back from the podium, I'd like to introduce you to the real reason we're all here today. My son, Evan Vance. Evan climbed the steps, visibly nervous, his hands trembling slightly, a faint echo of everything he'd survived. He gave me a small nod. I squeezed his shoulder and stepped away from the stage. He raised the violin to his chin, closed his eyes, and began to play. It wasn't a mournful piece. It was fierce, fast, intricate, full of sharp, biting notes that sounded like pure defiance. His fingers, the very ones that had once been crushed, the ones doctors warned might never fully recover, moved effortlessly across the strings. The music filled every corner of the room. It sounded like bones knitting back together. It sounded like a survivor crying out, not in agony, but in victory. I watched from the side of the stage as Agent Harper stepped up beside me. She remained my contact at the bureau, though somewhere along the way, we'd become genuine friends. "He's good," she said. "He's better than good," I replied. "He's unbreakable." "You know," Harper added quietly, "Julian comes up for parole in 7 years. He's been teaching literacy classes behind bars. He asks about you sometimes." I watched Evan hit the final note, a soaring crescendo that hung suspended in the air like a bird taking flight. The crowd erupted into applause. 7 years is a long time, I said. Maybe by then I'll be ready to see him. "And the foundation?" Harper asked. "We just picked up a case out of Detroit. Single mother, corrupt narcotics unit." I smiled. The war might be over, but the work never truly stops. "Send me the file," I said. "Let's get started." That evening, once the gala had ended and the guests had all gone home, the house settled into quiet. Evan and I sat together on the back porch as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. "You played beautifully today," I told him. "Thanks, Dad," he said, glancing down at his hands. It felt like I was finally letting go of it, the fear. "Fear serves a purpose," I said. "It keeps you alert, but you can't let it take the wheel. It belongs in the back seat." He laughed. "That sounds like something a general would say." "It is," I admitted. We sat there in comfortable silence for a while. "Dad? Yeah? Do you think they ever felt sorry, the officers?" I thought about Kyle, sitting in his cell nursing a broken arm and a bruised ego. I thought about Grant, disgraced and utterly alone. "Regret requires a conscience, Evan," I said. "I don't know if they regret what they did, but I know they regret ever crossing us." He leaned back in his chair. "That's good enough for me." I looked at him then, and understood that my real legacy was never going to be the money or the buildings I'd built. It was him, a boy who had walked straight through fire and emerged forged from steel. I realized in that moment that the story of my life was never really about who I'd broken, it was about what gets built once the breaking finally stops. I stood and looked out toward the horizon. The world was still vast, still dangerous, but we were ready for it. "Come on," I said. "Your mother made pie." Evan smiled. "Apple? Is there ever any other kind?" We walked back inside together, leaving the darkness behind us, closing the door on everything we'd survived, and stepping forward into a life that was finally, wonderfully ordinary.